I drove 8 hours to attend my dad's retirement party. When I walked in, he raised his glass and said, "Look who finally showed up." The disappointment. The room went silent, then laughed. My stepmom smirked. "You weren't even invited." I set the gift down, nodded, and said, "Enjoy it. I won't be back." What happened next left them speechless. Hey Reddit, I'm Eli, 38M, and yeah, I know the title sounds like something out of a bad family drama, but every word of it happened. I've been reading posts here for years, nodding along at stories about entitled relatives or long overdue revenge, never really thinking I'd end up writing one of my own. But after talking with my partner, a few old friends, and doing some thinking, I realized this isn't something I want to keep sitting on. So here goes. If you've got a drink or snack nearby, now's a good time to settle in. This one's long, and honestly, the ending still sits with me like a stone in the gut. Let me give you some background first, because this story didn't begin the day of my dad's retirement party. That was just the final blow. I grew up in a quiet part of northern Pennsylvania, the kind of town with one blinking stoplight and an ice cream shop that's been run by the same family since the 60s. My childhood, for the first 12 years, was actually pretty good. My mom, Laura, was the kind of woman who made everything feel warm, cozy nights with hot cocoa, handwritten notes and lunchboxes, that sort of thing. She was a middle school art teacher and smelled like cinnamon and acrylic paint. My dad, Richard, was a bit more reserved. An insurance man through and through, buttoned-up shirts, polished shoes, neat handwriting. He wasn't cold, exactly. Just quiet. Predictable. The kind of dad who mowed the lawn every Saturday and insisted on budgeting down to the cent. But he and my mom had a rhythm. He'd grumble and pace while she danced around him with her easy laughter. They worked. Then, when I was 12, everything cracked. Mom got sick. It happened fast. A diagnosis in February, gone by June. Cancer. I still remember the soft beeping of machines in her hospital room, the way my dad started sleeping in his recliner instead of the bed, how the house smelled like lemon cleaner for weeks after the funeral. For a while, I thought he was just grieving. And he was, in his way. But the thing is, he didn't really talk about her after she died. Not to me, not to anyone. One day she was there, and the next, it was like she'd never existed. Her clothes were boxed up by August. The art supplies disappeared from the garage. Her favorite mug vanished. I asked about it once, and he just said, "We have to move forward, Eli." It's what she would have wanted. That fall, he met Maureen. She worked in the same office building, human resources, I think, and they ran into each other at a company bowling event. I was 13 by then, still reeling, still checking the kitchen at night, half expecting Mom to be there. So when he brought Maureen home for dinner one evening, I just sat through it, eating silently while she talked about her garden and her kids like we were already a family. She had two, Chase, who was about my age, and Riley, who was 10. They moved in 6 months later. Maureen was polite at first. Friendly in that way some adults are when they don't actually want to connect with you. She made bland casseroles and labeled the pantry shelves. She used phrases like, "We're building a new chapter," and "Let's keep the energy positive." But she also made it very clear, early on, that she wasn't going to be a replacement mother. "I think we'll get along better if we just treat each other respectfully," she said one afternoon while folding laundry. I still remember how she never looked up from the towels. I was too numb to argue. Chase and I clashed from the start. He was loud, competitive, always trying to one-up me. If I got a B on a math test, he had an A. If I made the soccer team, he scored more goals. He once told me, "When we were 14, your dad likes me more because I give him less trouble." That stung. Probably because it was true. Dad started referring to all three of us as the kids, and slowly, it felt like I was fading out of the picture. The family photos changed. At first, it was a gradual shift, one with me in the corner, two with Chase and Riley front and center, then eventually, none with me at all. I mentioned it once to my dad, who just shrugged and said, "Well, you're not around much these days." By 18, I was out. I got into a state university across Pennsylvania and didn't come back except for the holidays. Even then, it was always awkward. Riley called Maureen Mom. Chase and Dad talked about fishing trips and shared inside jokes. And me? I mostly sat quietly, sipping coffee while Maureen told stories about Riley's piano recital or Chase's new car. Every year I debated not going home. Every year, Sadie, my partner now of 6 years, would gently suggest we just do our own thing. But some stubborn part of me kept trying, hoping maybe, something would change. Which brings us to a few months ago. My dad was retiring after nearly 4 decades at the same insurance firm. He made a big deal about it, sent out emails, printed invitations, the whole thing. Or so I heard. Because I didn't get one. No card. No email. Nothing. Then, 2 weeks before the party, I got a short message from Chase. Not even a text, an email. It read, "Hey, Dad's retirement thing is on the 15th. Starts at 5 p.m. At the house. Figured you should know." That was it. No greeting. No, "Hope you're coming." Just that. I read it 3 times, half thinking I'd missed something. I hadn't. Sadie saw my face and immediately asked what was wrong. I showed her the email. She stared at it, blinked, then said, "That doesn't even sound like an invitation." And it didn't. But again, some old part of me, the kid still waiting for his dad to ask about his day, decided to go. I bought a gift. I didn't want to show up empty-handed. It was a first edition of The Old Man and the Sea, a book my dad loved when I was little. He used to quote it to me before bed. "A man can be destroyed but not defeated." I found a copy at a rare bookstore online and paid extra to have it cleaned and rebound. I wrapped it in simple navy paper, wrote, "Congratulations, Dad, Eli," on a small tag, and got in the car at 6 a.m. the morning of the party. 8 hours on the road. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and far too much silence. The drive was uneventful. Trees. Rest stops. My thoughts. I kept rehearsing what I might say. "Proud of you. Glad I could make it." Something short, just to keep the peace. I pulled into the driveway at 4:50. The place was packed. Cars lined the curb. People were spilling out into the front lawn with plastic plates of food. Someone had set up a little tent in the backyard. There were balloons, a banner, even a framed photo collage of my dad through the years. Not one of the photos had me in it. I took a breath, grabbed the wrapped book, and walked up the steps. I could hear laughter and music through the open windows. When I stepped inside, the conversation dimmed. Not silent, exactly, but that kind of pause that rolls through a room like a cold breeze. People turned. Some looked curious. Others looked confused. My dad was standing near the fireplace, drink in hand, talking with a group of coworkers. He turned, saw me, and smiled. But not the kind of smile you hope for. He raised his glass and said, with mock cheer, "Well, look who finally showed up." The disappointment. A few people laughed. Not many. Just enough to make my stomach knot. I stood still, blinking. Maureen, standing beside him in a navy dress, looked me up and down and said, "I didn't know we sent you an invitation." I looked at Chase across the room. He didn't even meet my eyes. I placed the gift gently on the table with the others. Took a breath. Nodded. "Enjoy it," I said. "I won't be back." I turned and walked toward the door. And that is where everything started to come apart. Because just as I stepped onto the porch, I heard a voice behind me say, "Wait, don't go. You should see what they've been hiding." I stopped cold. I turned around and saw Riley standing there, her face pale, hands shaking slightly. I hadn't seen Riley in nearly 2 years. Last I'd heard, she'd transferred colleges, moved to Boston, and was studying something to do with behavioral psychology. We were never close growing up. She was younger, quieter, always orbiting her mother's shadow, but there were rare moments, brief flickers when she'd sit next to me during dinner or ask me to help her with algebra. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd reconnect as adults. So when I turned around and saw her on the porch, it took me a second to recognize her. Her hair was darker than I remembered, pulled back in a simple braid, and she looked thinner, tired even, like someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. Her eyes, though, those were the same. Deep brown, expressive, the kind of eyes that always seemed to say more than her words. She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't leave yet. You really don't know what's going on, do you?" I was still angry, still smarting from what my dad and Maureen had just done. The humiliation hadn't even had time to settle yet. But something in her tone cut through the noise. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She looked past me toward the yard where guests were mingling, then motioned for me to follow her around the side of the house. I hesitated for a second, then followed. The lawn was noisy with clinking plates and shallow laughter. Maureen's voice floated through the air, cheerful and clipped, talking about someone's promotion. Riley led me down the narrow stone path beside the house, toward the old shed in the back. I hadn't been back there in years. As a kid, it had been my little sanctuary, the place I'd go to escape Maureen's endless rules and Chase's smug superiority. After they moved in, Maureen claimed it as a garden tool space and locked it up. I hadn't given it much thought since. We stopped behind the shed, just out of sight of the crowd. Riley turned to face me, arms folded tightly. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "But I was hoping." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She took a deep breath. "Because I couldn't keep pretending this family is normal anymore. I thought maybe if you heard it from me, you'd believe it." My stomach tightened. Believe what? There was a long pause. The kind of pause you feel in your chest more than your ears. Then she said, softly, "Dad didn't just forget to invite you, Eli. He deliberately didn't invite you. Maureen didn't want you here. She didn't want you at the party, she didn't want you in the house, and she definitely didn't want you around while they start transitioning things." I frowned. "What things?" Riley looked down, picking at her thumbnail. "He's already drafted a new will. 2 months ago. He left almost everything to Chase. The house, the investments, his retirement accounts. I overheard them arguing about it one night. They didn't even try to hide it. Maureen said you'd disappeared long ago, so why should you be in the picture?" The words landed like stones in my gut. I didn't even know what to say. Riley looked up. "He's erasing you, Eli. Just like he erased Mom." That stopped me. "You mean my mom?" She nodded. "He boxed everything up when she died. Said it was too painful to leave her things around. But I found some of it. In the attic. Letters. A few photos. Even her recipe book." I shook my head. "I thought all that was gone." "They wanted you to think that." She looked off toward the trees. "They act like you're the outsider, but it was never really about you, was it? It was about control. About shaping the family the way she wanted it. You didn't fit." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at me then, really looked. "Because I'm tired of pretending. I can't keep standing next to people who smile in public and poison things behind closed doors. Chase thinks he's won. Maureen thinks she's succeeded. But you deserve to know." I leaned back against the shed wall, the cool wood pressing into my shoulder. "You said there was something I needed to see." She nodded. "Come with me." "But not here." I didn't want to bring it to the house in case someone found it. Without another word, she turned and started walking toward the back gate that opened onto the narrow wooded strip behind their property. I followed, my legs feeling like lead. My heart was hammering, not in fear, exactly, but something close. A twisted anticipation. Like I was finally approaching the edge of something I'd spent years ignoring. We reached a small clearing just past the fence line, where the trees thinned slightly and the light filtered in soft and gold. Riley knelt near a weathered wooden box tucked beneath a loose pile of brush. She pulled it free and opened the lid. Inside were several thick envelopes, a few old photo albums, and a red leather notebook I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "That was your mom's," she said, handing me the notebook. "It's her journal." I opened it slowly. Her handwriting was the same, loopy, careful, always in black ink. The first page was dated March 14th, 1993. I didn't read it right then. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much. "Why do you have this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I found it last Christmas," she said. "Maureen was going through the attic, said she wanted to declutter. She told Chase to toss this box, but I pulled it aside when no one was looking. I didn't know what was in it until I was back at school." My chest ached. A deep, hollow ache I hadn't felt in years. I looked at the envelopes. One was addressed to Eli. "Open when you're ready." My name. In my mother's handwriting. I swallowed hard. "Why now?" I asked her. "Why tell me this today?" Riley stood, brushing off her knees. "Because if I didn't, you'd leave again. And maybe that's what they want. But you deserve to choose whether you stay gone, not have the choice taken from you." I stared at the journal in my hands. The pages whispered faintly as I turned a few. Notes about school, about Dad's long hours, about her concerns. I caught one line before I could stop myself. "He listens more to her now than he does to me. I wonder if he even notices how quickly the house stopped feeling like mine." "She knew," I said quietly. Riley nodded. "Yeah, I think she always did." I didn't speak for a long time. The weight of it all, the years of silence, the calculated exclusions, the quiet rewriting of our family's history, sat heavy on my shoulders. Finally, I looked up. "What do you want me to do?" Riley's expression was unreadable. "That's up to you. But there's one more thing you should know." She pulled out a printed email. One page. I recognized Maureen's name at the top. The subject line read, "Changing the trust before retirement." I read the first paragraph, then the second. By the third, my hands had gone cold. What Maureen had done, What she convinced my dad to do wasn't just personal. It was calculated. It was financial. It was planned. And in that moment, the anger I'd been swallowing for 25 years began to rise, not loud or explosive, but steady and cold. I stood in that clearing with Riley for what must have been 15 minutes, the journal in one hand and that printed email in the other, feeling the last remnants of what I thought my family was being peeled away, layer by layer. The weight of it wasn't just emotional anymore. It was tangible. I could feel it in my bones, like the ache you get before a storm. A slow, gathering heaviness. I folded the email and tucked it into the journal. The envelopes, Mom's letters, I placed carefully back into the wooden box, shut the lid, and nodded to Riley. "Take it to my car," I said quietly. "Put it in the back seat. It's unlocked." She didn't ask questions. Just lifted the box and headed off through the trees. I stayed behind, letting the wind move through the leaves, collecting myself. I'm not a vindictive person. That's the truth. I've always tried to be the one who steps back, lets things roll off. I never liked conflict, never saw the point in fighting a losing battle, especially with people like Maureen or Chase, who always had Dad wrapped around their fingers. But there's a different kind of clarity that comes when you realize you've been cut out. Not just forgotten. Removed. Strategically, silently, like a name wiped from a chalkboard. And that's when something shifted in me. Not rage. Not even revenge. Not yet. Just purpose. I walked back to the house, not through the front where I'd arrived, but along the side fence, watching the crowd from a distance. They were all still gathered around the tables in the backyard, Dad holding court near the grill, Maureen topping off plates, Chase laughing a little too loudly with a few former coworkers. Riley had already slipped back inside, unnoticed. I saw her pass the bay window toward the front door. Good. I scanned the crowd and spotted a man in a navy blazer, chatting with Maureen. A short, round man with gray at the temples and sharp eyes. That was Roger Hadley, Dad's financial advisor. He'd been around since I was a kid. Always sent a birthday card. I remembered he had a daughter my age. We'd played tag at one of those office picnics back when Mom was still alive. I took a slow breath and walked up the porch stairs again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the living room. People turned again, but I didn't give them time to comment. "Roger," I said, voice firm but polite. "Do you have a moment?" He blinked. "Eli?" Of course." "Sure." Maureen's smile faltered. Her mouth opened like she was going to interrupt, but I was already turning away. Roger followed me into the front hallway. I shut the door gently behind us and turned to face him. "I know we haven't spoken in years," I began, "but I need to ask you something. Off the record. Just between us." His expression shifted, subtle concern creeping in. "All right." I pulled out the printed email and handed it to him. He read silently, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This came from Maureen's account?" he asked. I nodded. Riley found it. She overheard them talking about some kind of shift in the family trust. Chase getting everything. And now I see this. Roger rubbed his chin. "Well, I can't disclose details of your father's portfolio without consent, obviously, but this is something I'll need to verify. If Maureen's pressuring Richard to make these kinds of changes, it's not just unethical, it could be legally challenged." That was what I needed. "What if?" I said slowly. "I told you I have my mother's original financial documents, her statements, her notes on their joint accounts, and a handwritten letter addressed to me dated before her passing." Roger raised an eyebrow. "You do?" I nodded. "She left more than anyone let on. It's clear now my father's clean slate after her death was more of a scrub. If there's evidence she intended for me to inherit specific assets, or even just be part of the trust, and if Maureen deliberately suppressed that, then it could open the door to contesting the entire trust revision," Roger finished, his tone sharpening. "Exactly." I thanked him and returned to the living room, weaving through the guests as if nothing had happened. But my mind was moving fast. I wasn't going to make a scene. That wasn't my style. But I was going to let Maureen know the game had changed. As I reached the kitchen, Maureen intercepted me. Her smile was tight, her hand resting lightly on my arm like she was trying to shepherd me out. "Eli, I thought you said you were leaving," she said, voice low but pointed. "We have a lot of people here, and I don't want things to be uncomfortable." I tilted my head. "You don't want things to be uncomfortable?" She blinked. "Well, yes. I mean, considering the history." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Maureen, I remember when you first moved in. You said you weren't here to be a replacement, that you just wanted peace. But what you really wanted was control." Her expression tightened. "You replaced photos. You discarded my mom's belongings. You turned dad against his own son, and now you're trying to erase me from the will. But you made one mistake. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. You left Riley in the house. Her eyes flickered. Not much, but enough. I gave a small, cold smile. And she's not on your side anymore. I left her standing there and moved into the living room. Dad was by the fireplace again, chatting with an older couple. I walked over and waited until the conversation paused, then put my hand on his shoulder. Hey, Dad, can we talk for a minute? Just us. He looked surprised, maybe even a little suspicious, but nodded. We stepped into his office. The door clicked shut behind us. I didn't sit. Neither did he. Maureen told me I wasn't invited. I said plainly. You call me a disappointment in front of 50 people. He opened his mouth, started to say something, but I cut him off. Save it. I'm not here for an apology. I just want you to know that I've spoken with Roger. And I've read Mom's journal. The original, the one Maureen tried to throw out. His face paled slightly. I continued. I know about the trust changes. I know you cut me out. And I know it was Maureen's idea. But you went along with it. He stepped back slightly. Eli, you've been distant for years. Because I was pushed out, I snapped. There's a difference between leaving and being locked out. He looked down. I could see the gears turning. The hint of guilt, real or performed, I couldn't yet tell. You have every right to decide what happens to your estate, I continued. But you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to erase my mother. And you certainly don't get to erase me. I stepped closer. You might think this ends here. That I'll walk away again. But I won't. Not this time. Then I pulled a copy of the email from my jacket and laid it on his desk. You should read this. And think about whether the people closest to you actually care about your legacy, or just what they can claim from it. I turned and left. Out in the hallway, Riley was waiting. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded slowly. No, but I will be. We slipped out through the side door and walked back to my car. As we drove away, the laughter from the backyard faded behind us. I didn't look back. The day after I got home, I spent nearly 6 hours going through my mother's journal. I read every entry, every scribbled note in the margins. Some of it was simple, stories about me as a kid, updates about her garden, frustrations about dad working late. But as I kept reading, a picture started to form. One that was so clear it was impossible to ignore. My mother had felt Maureen pushing her out long before anyone else had noticed. There were entries dated only months after Maureen was hired as dad's assistant. Subtle things at first, phone calls that lingered too long, conversations that stopped when my mom entered the room. Then came the dismissive comments about how Maureen was more organized or better with the books. At first, she thought it was paranoia. Then she found a receipt. One dinner. 2 people. A hotel reservation. She never confronted him about it. Not directly. But in her journal, she wrote, I see it now. She's not just a colleague. She's a wedge. And he's letting her in. What made it worse was what came next. How quickly things changed after my mother passed away. Dad stopped talking about her. Photos disappeared from the walls. Her favorite chair was sold. Her closet emptied. I hadn't imagined that part. It happened fast, and it wasn't grief. It was erasure. A reset. The envelopes in the box were addressed to me, Riley, and one that was never sealed, labeled simply Richard. The letter to me was the hardest to read. She wrote about how proud she was of me, how she hoped I'd always remember who I was, how if anything ever felt wrong in the family, I should trust my instincts. But the real surprise came from the other documents she left behind, photocopies of their original estate planning papers. My name was listed clearly, along with a letter from the attorney explaining their wishes, that I would inherit half of all assets not held jointly. It had been signed and notarized. The letter included my mother's note requesting that her personal items, including her journals, photographs, and keepsakes, be set aside for me to claim when I turned 25. None of those things ever reached me. Maureen had them hidden in the attic. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with a lawyer, someone recommended by Roger, who had taken an immediate and personal interest in the situation once I showed him what I'd found. He'd know my mother. He remembered her calm presence and how she always sent him a thank you card after every financial meeting. When he saw how completely I had been cut out of the revised will and how my mother's documented wishes had been ignored, he didn't hesitate to act. We filed an official challenge to the estate documents. Since the revised trust excluded me entirely, and we had clear evidence of prior legal agreements in my mother's handwriting. The case was strong. But what made it stronger was what Riley provided. She wrote a statement, detailed, honest, and unflinching. She included what she overheard. Maureen boasting about how easier things would be once Eli is fully out of the picture, and Chase mocking me for being too soft to ever come back and fight for anything. We didn't go to court. That was the part Maureen didn't expect. Roger quietly arranged a meeting between my lawyer, Dad, and his estate attorney. Maureen wasn't present. When presented with the documents, letters, and the original estate plan, Dad didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He just sat in silence as my lawyer went through every page, line by line. Finally, after nearly an hour, he cleared his throat and said, "I didn't think you'd care about any of this. You left." "I didn't leave," I replied. "You gave me no reason to stay." He didn't respond. By the end of the meeting, my lawyer handed over a proposed settlement, one that honored the original wishes my mother had outlined. A full half of the estate, including a share of the house's value, and, more importantly, the return of all personal items my mother had owned. It took less than 2 weeks for the paperwork to come through. Maureen wasn't quiet about it. She left me 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them, but Riley did. She told me Maureen accused me of manipulating an old man and poisoning the family legacy. Chase left a comment on one of my photos online that just said, "Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond to either of them, because it wasn't about money. It was about being seen, about not letting my mother's memory be scrubbed away to make room for someone else's convenience, about standing up and saying, "You don't get to erase me." Riley and I talk regularly now. She's thinking about moving out to my city after she graduates. We've rebuilt something honest between us, fragile still, but real. As for Dad, he signed everything. We haven't spoken since. The house was sold last spring. I took a few things my mom had once treasured, her music box, some old photo albums, her favorite shawl that still smelled faintly of lavender. I left the rest. I don't know where Maureen or Chase are now. I heard through Roger that they tried to contest the settlement quietly, but with no evidence and no support from my father, it didn't go anywhere. And honestly, I don't think about them anymore. I don't replay that moment at the party when the laughter died and the smirk on Maureen's face told me I didn't belong. Because I know now that I do. Not just in a legal sense, but in a way they can't touch. I carry my mother's voice in those journals. Her words reminded me who I was and who I still am. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance I could have asked for.